Hello everyone, this is Pal Ponder on Weather. In this update, we've got a massive storm brewing with the triple whammy effect causing very heavy rain and potentially significant flooding in the coming days heading into next week. Welcome back everyone, Pal Ponder on Weather here. Happy Friday out there. Man, we got a lot to talk about in this weather update, so let's really delve into the details. If you are new to the channel and you like detailed weather breakdowns, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's get right to it on the North American view this morning and take a look at this overall setup. And this is a kind of a rare setup for August standards because we've got a significant trough that dived into the eastern part of the U.S., brought all those cooler conditions, backdoor cold front, brought all the cooler conditions, and finally some rain in portions of the central states and much of Texas. But up to the northwest, it's completely the opposite. We've got a developing strong ridge. We've got a lot of high pressure in place, and we got a lot of hot temperature to contend with, not just in the Pacific Northwest, but well up into Canada. And that's kind of a significant setup. I tell you, if we had this setup in the month of January, we'd be talking about a crazy snowstorm right now. But honestly, we're gonna be talking about a pretty significant rain event that's gonna be unfolding in places they've been haven't seen rain in months in parts of like Oklahoma and Texas. So it's going to be a drastic turnaround. So why is all this happening? So let's head well up north, up into the teleconnection. So let's take a look at the overall P&A, which is your Pacific North American, right? I showed you that red blob over there in the Pacific Northwest and much of Canada. That's really indicative of what they often is referred to as a positive P&A, which is when it's really basically positive. Your jet streams well up into Canada. It pulls that ridge well northward and increases all the heat in those areas off into the western states. And then off to the central and eastern 2/3 of the states, you got a negative EPO, which is your Eastern Pacific Oscillation. That's just completely the opposite. And so that's why you see all that blue on the map with into the Northeast and the Ohio Valley filtering all the way down into Texas, and then just completely the opposite. So, and that creates what they call a Northwest flow setup, where you have systems conversing from the Northwest, sending it down to the Southeast. And we're going to have a kind of a triple whammy effect unfolding in the coming days that could bring a fairly significant rain event. So let me set the stage for you. So let's take a look at this setup right here. We've got this little blob out here into the Bay of Campeche. That's the National Hurricane Center gives it a 40% chance of developing in the coming days. That is going to be traversing northwest, impacting Mexico, and obviously impacting Texas. This is what they refer to as Invest 99L right now. Plus, we have 98L down here into just south of Arizona. Look at that. That's pretty impressive. And it's still holding its own. That brought all the heavier rain just a couple of days ago in South Texas, portions of El Paso. Now we're talking significant flooding in portions of Arizona because this is still around. And that is going to be swinging over and bringing some heavier rain to portions of Oklahoma and Texas. We also have a pretty significant trough here. And then we have this little swirly action up here into portions of Iowa. That's our cold front. So you got all this kind of all coming together and all merging together to just set up a fairly significant rain event that's going to be unfolding really starting on Sunday. So, but before that, here's the overall setup on the satellite picture. You got that little blob down here. There's our first initial front that brought heavier rains to portions of Oklahoma and parts of North Texas the other day. Now that's actually bringing some rains towards Austin area yesterday. They broke their 51 day in a row rainless streak drought. Now that heavier rains over Houston. So they're getting some beneficial rains in Houston right along this front here. So that's still impacting portions of Louisiana, back into Mississippi and Alabama, back into Georgia, getting into the Carolinas, where we underneath that little swirl that I showed you has some little instability, ringing out some rain showers for them. And that little swirl there, that's that 98L that we talked about. That's going to be lifting northward today. That's where we could be looking at some flash flooding setups in parts of Arizona. In fact, The Weather Prediction Center does have a moderate risk for excessive rainfall. So this is the desert, folks, right? They've seen their 10th worst, monsoon season on record so far, and we've got back-to-back moderate risk excessive rainfall days. So we could be looking at some fairly significant flooding down here into portions of Arizona, and that will filter into portions of Utah, getting into Colorado. There's the setup along the boundary with that cold front. They do have a slight risk for heavier rainfall. The atmosphere is pretty juicy, right? I mean, we're talking up to 2-inch rainfall potential underneath some of these isolated spots. And then right along this boundary here into the Carolinas, we could also see some heavier rains, and underneath that swirl that I highlighted into Iowa as well as into Missouri. But like I mentioned, it doesn't really change much tomorrow, as that little 98L will finally try to be on its move. It shifts a little bit. Now we're parking the heavier rains back into filtering in places in New Mexico. That'll head into portions of the Texas Panhandle, while this little swirly extends into portions of Illinois as well as Indiana. So by the time we get into Sunday, all that's going to be coming together, right? So let me show you on the overall water vapor imagery. This is kind of a transport, this is kind of depicts on what, where it's coming from. We're going to be opening up the Gulf of Mexico, right? So these temperatures are along the coast here. We've had hardly any activity down here. The tropics have been pretty quiet. So we got these waters pretty prime right now, about 86, 87, 88 degrees right along the coast. So you've got the indication of we're going to be, building a lot of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. And then we've got that lift coming from the north, and it's just going to be kind of a conveyor belt. So you've got a 1, 2, 3, almost quadruple whammy approach happening with that lift from the Gulf of Mexico, from that 99L down here. You got the remnants from 98L. You got the low pressure center coming in off from the northwest to the southeast, and then you've got the cold front. So it's all going to be merging together, and then the upper level winds go light. They go light, and so you get these training supercell thunderstorms elongating over a same path for an extended period of time. And you could be looking at, you've been in a drought, but we can be flipping it big time and talking about a significant or even possibly an extreme drought, as it just kind of sits there over several days, parking itself. And we could still see some heavier rains fishtailing into portions of Indiana, getting into Ohio, and right along this boundary here in this kind of traverse zone, we'd be looking at some fairly heavy thunderstorms. But man, it doesn't get any better on Monday. In fact, it actually gets worse. So I think more the significant flooding really starts to unfold on Sunday night, heading into Monday. Because we look at what's the atmosphere. Imagine this whole atmosphere has been inundated with 100-degree heat day after day after day. So you can imagine all the heat build up in the upper levels of the atmosphere. And then you got this quadruple whammy type of effect with all the lift in the atmosphere. And then you got a conveyor belt, a training supercells, one after another. We get water content values of 3.5 inches per hour. That's a lot without a tropical type system, right? And so that is what the atmosphere is capable of. We're talking intense rain at times, going into the evening hours, heading into Monday morning, right along this zone, right along the Red River area, into North Texas, and that extends into East Texas with kind of the bullseye that fills into portions of Arkansas, into Louisiana. So definitely very concerned of some flash flooding that's going to be unfolding there, because we look at the overall kind of a normalization, what you typically see this time of year, right? So historically, say, for example, Dallas-Fort Worth averages about 2 inches of rainfall in the month of August. It's their driest month of the season, right? So when you start to look at anomalies, pointing out 5 times the normal average, right? That's intense, very intense rainfall could be setting up over right in the same area. So that's essentially implying that we could be looking at fairly almost double-digit rainfall totals is definitely not out of the questions, and some ensemble members are actually pointing at that. So definitely significant flooding, and that just extends into portions of Tuesday as well, with these darker greens really setting up over portions of southern Oklahoma, getting into North Texas, into East Texas. That extends. It fishtails a little bit further south this time, going into Louisiana. Not extreme rains, but still some heavier rains. And then we'll get some heavier rains too along the mid-Atlantic states into the Northeast. But man, the temperatures are crazy for August. I mean, this whole area that's been inundated with triple-digit heat for months. I mean, Dallas their average low for the entire month of July was 81 degrees. Now we're talking a high of 81 degrees on Tuesday, right? That is a severely significant overall shift in the overall weather setup. That's just in a 3-week time span of what we're looking at. And it's really unfolded yesterday. And I think this just extends really for the rest of the month. Look at all the widespread 80s. This is late August, guys. We're not talking about late September here. This is late August. So fairly cool conditions, and it doesn't end there. It does not end there, because it really doesn't have much steering currents in the upper levels to move this anytime soon. So we could be looking at a several day prolonged event in a lot of these same areas, but eventually this will shift into portions of central Texas. We're talking places like Austin, San Antonio, getting into the Waco area, getting into portions of Houston Metroplex again. That will shift a little bit away from North Texas and shift down into central Texas, but still some heavier rains locked over the state. And the setup on Wednesday is pretty prime, right? We still got that positive P&A. We got all the ridge building up in the Pacific Northwest. Not really any rain to speak of up there. The heat extends well up into Canada. We've got a perfect alignment, almost like an omega block trying to set up. We got the ridge trying to build back into the Northeast. We got all this low pressure center underneath, so it's kind of locked. It's locked, right? It can't move anywhere. So you get this perfect setup, this perfect storm. I mean, the saying is, all droughts end in floods, and floods end in droughts. And that's what's happening here, guys. We go through a significant drought happening to potentially very heavy rain, if not significant rain. And there's signs it could be even portions of extreme rainfall at times. So, and then like I mentioned, it doesn't end there. So it's not just a kind of a this week setup. With that block in place, you're still getting this funnel conveyor belt of moisture with the monsoonal flow wrapped along the central portions of the U.S. and still above average rains for a good chunk. Portions of the South will extend into the Ohio Valley and off the East Coast. And of course, all the cooler conditions as well. So it continues to remain that positive P&A out west. So you got all the warmer conditions, you've got all the sinking air, you got primarily drier conditions out there. You got the warm up, right, with the blocking taking place, and all the cooler conditions in the central part of the U.S. which basically is almost the complete opposite of what it's been as of late. But yeah, here's my concern. So if you start looking at some of the ensemble member guidance and start pinpointing, remember I showed you the average is about two inches on a normal, just typical August time frame. Right now, for an example, we'll just use it as an example. Dallas Fort Worth's about a little less than an inch, right? A little less than an inch at the airport. But wow, these data points, these ensemble members are talking 5 times. We're talking 500% more than what your typical average. So when you combine all members of the European guidance and kind of point that out there, it's saying, hey, the atmosphere is, say, capable of 10-inch rainfall between now and the end of the month, right? And that's what the ensemble members are implying. So that would be obviously really significant. That would put you, in the top 10, if not almost the highest totals you've seen in an August standard. I mean, you don't see this type stuff in the month of August. So, but we've got a kind of a perfect scenario unfolding, if you will. I know you need rain, but it might come with a vengeance too fast, too soon, and then really locked on 2 portions of especially central and southern Oklahoma, especially North Texas and East Texas, and the heavier rains will filter into central Texas and South Texas, but just not as intense. The monsoon will be alive and prevalent and then a little bit lighter amounts as you head to the southeast and of course up the east coast. But yeah, the GFS is really kind of implying the same way, right? But maybe not as intense as the European, but we're still seeing kind of model congruency. So when you look at the drought, right? When you look at the drought, under fairly significant drought, you're talking about 26% of the state at the highest level of an exceptional drought in the state of Texas, 61% of in an extreme drought. We're talking 85% of the state into a very severe drought. So this would be a significant change in the overall setup of what you've seen as of late, just in the past 3 or 4 months, where a lot of these areas have went months without seeing a drop of rainfall, and then you get all this in a 10-day time span. So if we put all that together, we look at some of the overall, your numerical member models, we're looking at kind of a summary at all. Yeah, very concerning between now and the end of August, right? All this purple and white, look at the chart, guys, implying, hey, 10 inches or potentially greater between now and the end of the month in a good chunk of central, north, and east Texas. And that looks to be kind of the bullseye over the next 10 days, with still fairly heavier amounts well to the south, with those blockings in place from west to east, and all the central US will be under the unsettled weather and the very intense rainfall. So hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel to catch the latest update, where I protect you before and after the storm.